Hello, and welcome to the Homeschooling Free from Fear podcast. I'm Caleb Schrader.
And I'm Leah Schrader. And we're here today to tell you about our journey as second generation homeschoolers who are currently homeschooling our own 6 children and attempting to do so free from fear.
Join us as we seek to encourage you to homeschool your children in the 21st century. Today, we're going to start talking about our homeschool journey. I grew up in Southern California in the 1980s, and my wife is going to be interviewing me to talk a little bit about my experience as a first-generation homeschooler.
All right. So can you take us back to the 1980s and kind of give us the background of your parents beginning the homeschool journey with you?
So I'm the third of 9 children, and my parents decided to homeschool my older sister, who's 4 years older than me, and I was born in 1981. So early 80s, they started their homeschool journey. And in a large part, it was motivated because my dad was a public school teacher, and he sort of saw how the public education system was failing. The initial decision really wasn't because of worrying about indoctrination or some of the cultural fads that were sort of coming in the 80s. It was more he saw that the system that was created in public education was broken and it wasn't effective. And the individualized instruction he could provide for us in the home would be so much better. So it sort of motivated him to start his journey. But in the early 1980s, it wasn't legal to homeschool in California. So as a child, while I was being homeschooled, we kept the curtains closed. We didn't answer the phone during the day. We weren't allowed to go out and play until after school was over. So, truancy officers, that was a real thing when I was a child that we tried to avoid. And so early on, there was some temptation to have a little bit of fear because there was cultural forces that were opposed to what we were doing. And one of the neat things for me is like from the very beginning of my journey, I was a very timid child. And thinking about that, being worried that if I went out to play, truancy officer might come and arrest me. That was a real fear for me as a 6-year-old, right? And so being confronted with that early, I learned from the very beginning to be courageous and what God had called me to do.
What about your mom? Do you think she had any particular motivations just as a person who's home on a daily basis?
What was neat for my parents' sort of entrance into homeschooling, it was spearheaded by my dad. And I've talked to a lot of homeschool families. It's not always that way, but it's a real blessing when dad is the one who's like, let's do this, let's go for this. And there are dads out there who've been motivated to do that. But because my dad was the one who was in the education world and he was passionate about it, my mom just sort of, it was trial by fire for her. She was introduced to it because she wanted to support my dad. My mom is a wonderful example of what it looks like to be a helpmeet for your husband. And so she homeschooled us as my father's helpmeet to come alongside him. My mom was a high school graduate, and that was really the extent of her education. And she really didn't feel equipped for what my dad was asking her to do. But as time went on, she realized she had what she needed. She had to have an open ear. She had to have an open heart. She had to have availability. And she had all of those. And we had, for 9 of us, all of us were homeschooled K through 12. We had a very successful homeschool program, even though my mom was only a high school graduate.
Yeah. So can you tell us next about what you did? How did you transition from being a homeschooled kid into the next phases in life? Were you part of any kind of co-op or anything like that? What social activities did you have as part of your life?
Yeah. This is the big question that everybody asks, is about socialization. Because, all of those homeschoolers are completely introverted. Introversion is a personality trait that is devoid of your circumstance. And what I noticed as a public school teacher is I would have very homeschooled public school students. You know, the things that we think are come from a homeschool experience are not from a homeschool experience. They're regular common traits in kids. And we've observed that because we have twin boys who are going on 13 years old, and one of them is much more introverted than the other, and they have the exact same experience. So I had a lot of opportunities for social outlets, and anybody who is homeschooled will explain to you that homeschoolers have way more opportunities to engage with the outside world than public schoolers. Public schoolers only get to age associate. They only get to spend time with kids their age. Homeschoolers spend time with adults, with younger children, with older children across the board. When you're in a large family like mine, it's like a cottage school environment. And then we had constantly had friends who were over who we were interacting with. My parents did all sorts of extracurriculars. I grew up playing on the city basketball teams. I swam on the local city swim team. I played Little League. I was doing all of those things. And then also, as I got older and we wanted to do more competitive sports at the high school level, my parents joined local Christian schools' homeschool co-op. And through that, in the state of California, we were able to compete in CIF, which is the governing body for athletics in California, through our local Christian homeschool. So we joined that, and we're able to have all of the opportunities. My parents were able to gather together monthly with other parents and sort of encourage each other.
And so by this time, homeschooling was legal.
Yes, by this time, homeschool was legal. And something that was interesting is growing up in Southern California, I think a lot of people, they think, oh, you know, California, that's this crazy liberal state. Where we're at in California is very different. We live in LA County, and people might think, oh, LA County, that's crazy. You know, how can you even survive there? But we're in this conservative pocket. We live in the Antelope Valley. The Antelope Valley, one of the major employers out here, it's the aerospace industry. We're sort of the heartland of aerospace. Edwards Air Force Base is right out here, and we have a huge Plant 42 right here, where Northrop and Lockheed are situated. And as a rule, you know, military and engineers sort of creates a conservative community, and that's what we have here. We have two very like our governing officials in our area are very conservative, which means that we've always had some of these values that tend towards homeschooling. So even before homeschooling was totally legal in California, we already had a large community right here in LA County of homeschool friends. We used to have homeschool skate days during the day, like during the school day. We'd have homeschool skate days at the local roller rink. You know, if you guys grew up in the '80s, you know what I'm talking about. You go to the roller rink, and they would do it during the day because that's when the homeschoolers were available, and we would pack that place out with homeschoolers. We had homeschool sports leagues, and so it took off in the Antelope Valley. The first 3 or 4 years, it wasn't very popular, but then it just like exploded, and everybody was doing it. And part of that was because locally, our school system here was not doing a good job. And so parents just started pulling their kids out sort of en masse and homeschooling their children, and it really sort of took hold in our local community.
So we talked a little bit about the things you were doing outside of daily school, but what about in your school? What did your school look like on a daily basis? What was that like in your family?
Yeah, you know, my dad is very passionate about education and how students should learn. And we were his guinea pigs. Everything that, you know, maybe he couldn't do in his classroom, he was able to do at home with us. And so in some ways, it was very unstructured. In other ways, it was very structured. And essentially, my dad had two rules. He wanted us to learn to reason, and he wanted us to learn to read. And he figured if we could reason and we could read, we could figure out anything. And I think it worked, you know. I'm really not intimidated by learning new things. I'm pretty much an autodidact. I can pretty much self-teach anything, and I love just a wide range of subjects. I ultimately became a public high school math teacher, but my degree is actually a liberal arts degree. And so I'm sort of wide in what I prefer. And so day to day, what it looked like regular math instruction, because math was the way that we learned to reason. And so math taught us how to reason. And so we had very regular math instruction. And it was interesting because, early 1980s, there wasn't all of these homeschool publishing companies available. And so what my dad did for all of our textbooks is he went and he got textbooks that were being thrown away by the public schools. So public schools would just take their old books and throw them away. So we had a lot of old math textbooks from the 1970s that he would use. And in a lot of ways, they were a lot better. They're a lot more basic. They're a lot more straightforward. And so he would use these. We'd have our math every single day. When we were learning to read, we had daily instruction in reading. Once we were able to read, he would just write on our schedule every day, free reading. And we could sort of read whatever we wanted. And so for our literature, our history, our science, it was really up to us. It was more of an unschooling environment. So whatever we were passionate about, that's what we were studying. My dad was very passionate about grammar. So we always had grammar that we would study consistently to learn the rules of grammar. And then I always struggled with spelling. So he always had extra spelling for me to do. Something else that he believed that learning to read and play music was integral to mental development. And so all of us, once we could read, we would also learn to play the piano. And he always made sure that those followed each other. And we all wanted to learn to play the piano. And so our goal was to get to the point where we could read, and then we would learn to read music. He was passionate about us being able to read music and to play. And so all of us learned to do that.
So one thing you didn't mention was the encyclopedias. Can
Yes.
you explain that?
Yeah, so he even though he sort of had an unschooling environment, he wanted us to be rounded, right? And so he bought several levels of encyclopedia. So I don't know if you remember, there was the Children Encyclopedia Britannicas, which were written at about a 3rd to 5th grade reading level. And we were assigned portions of those every day. So I read through the Children's Britannica as a child, and then there was one for young adults, and there was one for adults. And we had to read each set. So over the course of the year, over several years, we would read through all of the encyclopedias.
Was that like a time amount that he would give you each day, like spend 30 minutes reading? Okay.
Everything was timed. He wouldn't give us pages. Once we got to the high school level, then sometimes he'd say, you need to do these pages on these days. By the time I got to the high school level, I'd already read all the encyclopedias. And in high school, the only thing that he had me do that was similar to that is he had me read the Dictionary of Cultural Literacy, if you're familiar with that, by Ed Hershitz. And actually, my younger siblings, he didn't have them read the encyclopedias. He had them read what your first grader needs to know, what your second grader needs to know. They read through those books.
Yeah. And we're experiencing right now how sometimes the education that you give the first kids is not exactly the same as the education you give the last kids.
Definitely.
Things change over time.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you're in high school, and did you go all the way through high school without any outside influence, or how did that work?
Yeah, pretty much I was homeschooled K through 12. My dad in high school was my primary teacher. When I was probably 11, 12, 13, sometimes I'd go to summer school with my dad because he's teaching public school, he teaches summer school, and I would just go listen to his lectures and do my homework and spend the day sort of with him. And the high school that he taught at was sort of a more small rural high school where he could do that, where he could just sort of bring his young child along, 11, 12, and I could sit there and listen. My senior year of high school, I took a couple of community college classes. So I was dual enrolled. My older siblings struggled a lot with sort of their self-motivation for homeschool. And so I'm the third. My 2 older siblings, my dad put both of them pretty much full-time in community college by the time they were 14 years old. So both of them had their associate's degree by the time they graduated from high school. For me, I was very self-motivated at home. I also was really sort of widely interested. I wanted to do a lot of different projects. And so he didn't see the need for me to go to the community college. And I just did that my senior year to sort of help the transition from homeschool to the community college level. But all throughout high school and junior high, I had a lot of different sort of hobbies and interest pursuits. Junior high, my major project was a chicken business where I raised chickens for meat, and then had to track everything for that. And all through high school, my brother and I were doing a lot of repairing cars. We rebuilt a car together, and we did a lot of just construction work for different people. We had a lot of jobs outside of the home. And so I learned a lot of practical skills all throughout high school and really didn't have as much time for the community college classes.
So some people might say that maybe did your academics get neglected? What happened once you got to college? If you spent so much time doing kind of practical things in high school, were you ready for college? Did you excel? How did that go?
Yeah. Every single one of us is born with a natural curiosity. And if that curiosity is cultivated, you can and you will learn anything that you want to. And so because my education was focused on curiosity and maintaining that curiosity, I approached college as an opportunity for me to answer questions that I had about the world and how it worked. And so I can remember being really nervous when I was going away to college, that the students would be way ahead of me, that they would have all these advantages over me, that they'd know things that I didn't know. Because especially my high school, my schooling was very much driven by my own passions, Like my junior year, instead of doing U.S. history, I spent the year studying George Washington's life. That's what I did for U.S. history, because that's what I was interested in. I wanted to know about George Washington. And so, I was thinking, well, what if there's these holes? What if there's these things that I don't know? And then I started the community college, and it blew me away, just the lack of retention that my fellow classmates had. They didn't remember anything that they learned in elementary school. They didn't remember anything that they learned in high school. Like all the professors were going over basic things that I'd been reading in the encyclopedia as a child, and I still remembered. And so it sort of blew me away how far back they were. And my interest was mathematics. And so sitting in the math classroom, I was astounded at how much simpler it was than the background that I had. Because before, in mathematics, I would read the section, and then I would do the homework, and I'd reread the section and go try to find examples, and I figured out I was teaching myself all of mathematics all the way through pre-calculus. And now I'm in college, I'm doing calculus, and it's so easy because the professor stands up there and they explain it to you. And I'd never had that before. And then their tests are just covering everything that you've already learned. And so it blew me away that my classmates struggled. I didn't even understand what they were struggling with, because college seemed so much easier than what I'd been experiencing before, because I've been trying to learn things. But also I had a leg up because I was still curious. And years after high school, when I became a public high school teacher, I realized like our system destroys curiosity. And so it's pretty much impossible to teach somebody who's not curious.
That's interesting. All right, so you mentioned that you got a liberal arts degree, and where did it go from there? How did you decide that you wanted to go into public education?
Yeah, so, late 90s, I graduated from high school in 1999. Homeschooling was getting more popular, but it wasn't as easy to transition right into a four-year college. Now, there's our local four-year university, the Master's University. I heard a stat recently that they're about 30% homeschool, 30% private, and 30% public school students now. So, it's way more popular. But back then, it was a little more difficult. So it's much easier to go to the community college and then transfer to a four-year. Also, as one of 9 children, my parents had a single income, Southern California. They couldn't really afford to send us right away to a four-year college. So going to community college was super cheap. In California, we actually didn't have to pay for it. You had to pay a $1 student representative fee. And so I went to the community college and actually competed. You and I competed in cross country together at the community college. And then I transferred to a local four-year university that had a satellite right here in the Allen Valley where we live. My plan was to go to a private Christian university and get a dual degree, a theology and a math degree. And the doors didn't open financially for me to go to a private Christian school. And so I ended up going to Cal State Bakersfield. And the degree I got is actually a math education degree. So education degrees are in the liberal arts field. So even though my emphasis was in mathematics, my degree was in the liberal arts, which meant I had to take all the linguistics courses, I had to take all the literature, I had to take all the writing and the sociology and all of that stuff that's involved in a liberal arts degree. I got my degree, and our plan was we were going to become educators so that we could be missionaries. Our plan was to get out on the mission field and serve the Lord there. Leah and I got married between our junior and senior year of college. And so my thought was I would get a liberal arts degree in education, and then that would be my open door to any country in the world. We really wanted to minister in a context where Christians were persecuted. And so that meant I had to have a degree that would get me in. And what was interesting is when we graduated from college and I started looking into missions organizations, none of them would even look at me because my degree was from a public university. And so we didn't have opportunities to go and serve in a missions context. And so I went straight into the public schools here in Southern California, and I found my missions context. I found my foreign mission field. And I mean, for a homeschooler, it's very foreign, to go into there. But what I found was such a hunger, such a ripe harvest. I had so many opportunities for evangelizing the lost in our public schools. And people will say, well, if we're pulling all the Christian kids out of the public schools, who's going to evangelize them? And this is why I really want to encourage people to become educators and get into our public schools, because there's ripe harvest fields there. And so I had a passion for education because of my curiosity. I really love studying the mind and how it works and how it acquires knowledge. And so all of a sudden I was presented with this opportunity to be in a classroom where I had hundreds of guinea pigs in front of me every single year, where I could test my methods and my best practices. And because of that, I also continued my education. I continued doing graduate classes. I eventually got my master's degree in math education from the University of Texas at Arlington. That's through a correspondence program that they did online. And I actually did my whole master's thesis on how the mind retains knowledge, how students, what's the best way to teach so that it sticks. And I looked at different curriculums and how to put that all together. We could talk about that on a future podcast. But what I found is in my education journey, the foundation I had, it propelled me. It didn't just equip me, it propelled me. And what I mean by that is I was really quickly outpacing many of my peers in just the level of education that I had. I was more than equipped. My second year at the public high school I taught, I started teaching full-time when I was 21 years old. By the time I was 22, I was the department chair, which meant I had all of the advanced courses. And just within 2 years of starting as an educator, I was already training teachers in how to teach. And a lot of that was because I'd been doing that my whole life. As the third of 9 children, I had 6 younger siblings. And so who had to help them? Who was tutoring them? Who was teaching them? My older siblings and I were constantly working with my younger siblings, helping them learn how to read, helping them learn their math. When I got into the college level, I realized that at first I was doing a lot of trades to sort of earn my way through, doing landscaping, doing plumbing, working for a tile guy. And then I realized I could make a lot more money tutoring. Even in the early 2000s, I would charge between $30 and $50 an hour just as a college student, and I couldn't keep up with the demand. And so all of that sort of equipped me. Eventually, I actually got a second master's degree later on in life after I was making enough income working as a public high school teacher, also as an adjunct professor at the local community college. And then I got a second master's degree in biblical studies, which opened up the door in 2020 for me to become a full-time pastor. And so now that's what I do. I'm a full-time pastor, and I'm an adjunct professor. Just work part-time at our local community college. And then I work as an independent contractor for textbook publishing companies. I'm working for Pearson right now. And so everything about my background equipped me because it kept the door open for curiosity. It gave me opportunities to ask questions, and then it gave me the skills that were necessary to allow me to answer those questions for myself. And the reason that public education fails is because so many teachers take away that opportunity for students to learn for themselves, or they don't equip them with the tools that they need to learn for themselves. See, there's a balance there. And my dad, with us as his guinea pigs, he found that balance. And so that now, to this day, I love learning. I love reading. I love studying. I love sitting and listening to lectures, which is abnormal, but it's because of my upbringing, my homeschool background, that I've been able to maintain that curiosity and develop the ability to pretty much teach myself anything.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And also, I just think that as a homeschool mom, it's encouraging to hear somebody who's been all the way through their whole journey and they're saying, yes, this was good for me. This prepared me for life. I've had just really good things come out of my homeschool, and I think that's what every single homeschool parent really wants for their child. They want them to be equipped for life and to be able to go and learn whatever they need to learn in life. And so I think that's awesome that you were able to do that.
Yeah. And, something else that I want to emphasize, if people hear this and they start, taking notes and trying to write an outline, okay, well, this is how it worked for Caleb Schrader, so we're going to do it with our kids this way. That's not how this works.
Right.
This is descriptive, not prescriptive. And what that means is I'm describing my journey. And, I have a brother who's 1 year younger than me. Our journeys were pretty similar because we're so close in age. My older two siblings were different. My youngest five siblings in my family, totally different from me. And every single child is unique. And that's the strength of homeschooling. So if you heard me talk about reading encyclopedias and you're like, I'm going to make my kids do that, I wanted to do that. And so that was part of, it wasn't that my parents forced me to do that. Like, I was motivated.
Yeah.
I loved reading and learning. And so I wanted to continue to do that. My other siblings didn't. And that's why they figured out other avenues. And so what I hope that you're hearing is just that passion piece.
Yeah.
Maintaining that passion. A rigorous instruction when you're young that gives you sort of those building blocks for learning later, reasoning and reading. You give a child those two things and they can learn anything. And really the structure is up to you as a parent. You know your child and you set it up for them. So listen to our description and don't hear it as a prescription.
One quick other question. Can you tell us, so you have 2 master's degrees. You graduated with a bachelor's degree in liberal arts. What about your other siblings? Can you tell us how they're doing educationally?
Yeah. So let's see. My older brother is going to be graduating in a couple months with his master's in computer science. My older sister has a master's degree. She was in reading. She was an educator, just like me. She still is an educator. My brother, who's a year younger than me, he has a master's degree. He's a full-time cross-country coach. He's the head of women's and men's cross-country and track at the Masters University. And then my sister after him, she's a nurse, and she's working on becoming a nurse practitioner right now. And then my brother after her, he has his bachelor's degree in business. He's a real estate agent, but his full-time job is that he's a firefighter. And then my next brother, he was in the Air Force, and he's working. He's worked in all sorts of different vocations. And what's interesting with him, he doesn't have a degree. And one of the things that I appreciated about my parents' upbringing, they didn't emphasize the degrees. They emphasized skills, real-world skills. And my brother's using those skills right now to support his family. My youngest sister is working on her master's degree right now. She's in computer science. And then my youngest brother is about to finish his bachelor's degree. And all of us love to read and are passionate about learning things in different fields in different ways all the time.
Yeah. So we would say that the measure of you know, a good homeschool experience means that you have kids who get degrees, but I do think that your siblings just all pursuing what they wanted to learn is a testament to your parents' faithfulness, and is a really good example of what a homeschooling family can accomplish.
Yeah. The measure of a successful homeschool is when your children graduate from your homeschool, are they still curious, and do they have the tools to answer questions for themselves? That's it.
Yeah.
It's not what fields do they go into, with that curiosity. It's not how much money they make. It's, are they still curious, and do they have the tools necessary? And one of the tools necessary is, the self-discipline, the autonomy. It's not just the reasoning. There's other components there too that we bring into our children's education to prepare them for what lies ahead. And so that preparation not always measured with metrics that the world would say, this is what means that you're being successful. But it's measured more by that. Is that curiosity still alive and thriving?
Yeah. Amen. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for listening to us today. We're going to continue talking about our homeschool journey. Our next episode, I'll be interested in interviewing Leah, talking to her a little bit about her background growing up as a homeschool kid in Southern California in the 80s, a little bit different from my own. And then in future episodes, we'll talk about just our own journey as homeschool parents and just sharing with you some of the inspiration that we've experienced in the homeschool world. Our goal here is to give homeschool parents the courage to do it. You can do this. You can be successful. We're a testimony to that, and then we want to be your biggest fans. Thank you so much for listening to us today.
Thank you.